Namaskar. Good evening to all the participants of the webinar series titled Fascinating Facets of Yoga. This is a webinar series sponsored by the Inter-University Center for Yogic Sciences, and it is done in commemoration of Azadi ka AmritMahotsav and the celebration of International Day of Yoga. We have started this webinar series on the 29th of May, and this will go on till the 13th of June. Today, we are going to talk about some aspects of yoga psychology. Specifically, we will deliberate on the famous second aphorism of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, that is the yogashchittavrittinirodhah. Is it possible? Is it possible to attain that state? We will deal with this subject in some details in the next 1 hour. So I would like to carry this discussion with the help of this small presentation. So all of us who are interested in yoga and have studied a little bit of Patanjali's yoga, we are all aware of this famous sutra, aphorism, yogashchittavrittinirodhah. We have heard it, we have tried it, we have analyzed it. But today, what we will look at is whether this is at all possible, and this answer we will seek through the commentary of the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the commentary of Vyasa, and the sub-commentaries of Tattvaisharati and Vivaranam and Yoga Vartikam. So we know that yoga, according to Patanjali, is the state of samadhi, which is the cessation of all mental modifications. So in the beginning of this verse, the commentator Vyasa explains that although it is mentioned as cessation of modifications, the word all is not there. And therefore, even if all modifications are not controlled, that state is also called samadhi, but a samadhi of a lower stature. So when we think of a calm mind where there is no thought, no sort of activities, immediately one picture comes to our mind, and that is of a very still lake water. And we are thinking here, is it possible? The picture sort of depicts that a person is overlooking a still water body and thinking that whether the mind can also be still like this. So is it possible or impossible? If it is impossible, is it something like this elephant walking on a rope? Or if it is possible, it is something like jumping over the cliff. So here we stand today in the beginning of the deliberation of today's topic, whether this is possible or whether this is not possible. And we will look at this through the eyes of Patanjali's yoga aphorism and the commentator Vyasa's detailed commentary. So we will briefly touch upon the few basic founding principles of the idea of yoga according to Patanjali. So yoga is defined as the state of samadhi, that is the cessation of mental modifications. And what happens if that state is achieved? Then immediately Patanjali says, that time the drashtuhu goes to his own state, that is tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. So this is the goal, this is the result of that kind of state of mind. And what if we attain that state? What is the gain? The biggest gain is that all the sorrows are gone. That is the permanent cessation of sorrows. Atyantik dukkha nivrittihi. And so this is how Patanjali motivates that, well, we all want to get rid of sorrows, but do we really get rid of it? So here he gives a very promising statement that yes, if the yogin goes to his own state, that is the swarupa, then there is a possibility, there is guarantee of permanent cessation of sorrows, which we are all looking for. However, this samadhi state is not just one step; it is a graded state. That means there are several intermediate stages. And Patanjali gives these names as Sampragyata, Savija, Nirvija, etc. So this state is actually achieved by a sequence of intermediate stages. So this is in a nutshell, a very brief snapshot of what is yoga according to the Patanjali's system of aphorism. Now let us look at Swami Vivekananda, the greatest yogi of modern age, how he has explained the idea. He says that the mind is like a lake, and the waves on the lake are waves of thought in the chitta, and these waves are called vrittis. The vrittis are ripples rising in it when external causes impinge on it. That means we know when there is a breeze blowing over the lake, then there are ripples. Or if the water is agitated all the time, then the bottom will not be seen. That is also, we are aware of this experience. And if the water is clear and there are no waves, we shall see the bottom. And this bottom of the lake is our true self. This is Swami Vivekananda's explanation of the mind and the state of yoga, and how the ripples of the water are likened to the vrittis, that is the thought waves that arise in our mind. And when those thought waves cease, that means they are stilled, then just like we can see the bottom of the lake, we can go to our true self, that is the Swarupa, according to Patanjali. So further coming back to Patanjali's idea of mind, mind is composed of the three gunas, the three main forces. Like the picture of the trident shows that there are three main arms through which the actions can be done. So these three gunas are the primary forces, the sattva guna, the tamo guna, and the rajo guna. And due to these three predominant traits, there are three predominant functions of the mind. Those are called the ability to acquire knowledge. That means all that information, cognition, all kind of understanding, knowledge acquisition that we do, that is due to the sattva guna, which is called the prakhya. And all the activity that we do, mental and as well as mental activities translating to physical activities, that is due to the rajoguna, and that is the property called pravrittihi. And due to the tamoguna, there is the faculty of resisting the activity, just the opposite of the rajoguna, and that is called the state of sthitihi. So because of the three gunas, we are having these three fundamental functions of the mind. This is what Patanjali explains. And vrittis are the modifications of the mind stuff, and it arises due to external as well as internal. Patanjali explains those two cases, external as well as internal. What are the external causes? External causes are the contact of the sense organs with the outside world, that is the sense objects. In this context, we can recall in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan says, Matra sparshastu ponteya shitoshna sukha. That means due to the contact of the senses with the organ, with the objects, there is the feeling of the duality, that is the feeling of heat and cold and pleasure and sorrow. So this is the reason why the mind is always into ripples. It breaks into ripples because there is always contact with the external world. However, Patanjali says there are internal causes also, which are not visible. So internal causes are the workings of a particular element of the mind, which are called the kleshas. The kleshas. What are the kleshas? They are called klesha chittasya malam. That means there are impurities in the mind. The impurity word is used because the true state, the true nature is free from any sort of impurity or property. That is why in respect to the true state, these are impurities. And are they lying there, sitting idle, doing nothing? No, they are always creating and manifesting themselves as vrittis. So the commentator explains the kleshas are active always. Pratyaya dwarena udbhasamanaha. That means they are always manifesting themselves with in the form of pratyaya, which are the vrittis. That means all the modifications and thoughts that we are having in our mind are actually coming because there are these kleshas which are embedded in our mind, which is not visible, but their effect as thoughts are visible. So, how many such thoughts arrive in a day? We cannot count. Asankhyata vritti. So there are innumerable thoughts in our mind. So how can we analyze those infinite thoughts? So here, commentator says, Patanjali says that primarily they can be classified into two type of waves. Those are afflicted and unafflicted. Klishta vrittihi and aklishta vrittihi. So what are those? The aklishta vritti, so we have two functions primarily. One is cognition and one is emotion. The mind has three main functions: cognition, emotion, and cognition. So these cognition and emotion are driven by these two vrittis. And the cognition, the vritti of the cognition are called the bodha vritti. That means they bring knowledge to us. And therefore, by these vrittis, we can gain peace of mind and even the higher form of samadhi like sampragyata samadhi, etc. This is according to the commentator. Whereas the klishta vritti, which are created due to the kleshas, they are full of rajas and tamas, and they create the feeling of emotion, the feeling of sorrow, feeling of stress, diseases, etc. The Yoga Vasishtha goes one step further, saying that these are the vrittis which create diseases which are mental and physical, both adhija and anadhija. So both these diseases are nothing but the result of the klishta vritti, that means the afflicted modifications of the mind. So these vrittis have effect both on body and mind. Whereas the aklishta vritti, the unafflicted ones, they are primarily driving our ability to acquire knowledge, and therefore it gives us a possibility of going in the higher state of mind because it is full of sattva. So this is in a nutshell the effect of the relation of the vrittis to the gunas and what their workings, what effect does it bring in the body as well as in the mind. Patanjali also explains that there are actually 5 states of the mind. Over the day, we undergo this cycle. We go from one state to the other, back and forth. And over the period of our practice of yoga, we get to higher states of mind. So the first state is called the mudha. Mudha state is the dull state, full of tamoguna. When do we experience this state? Of course, we do experience during our sleep. But not only during our sleep, during our waking state also, we can be in a state where we do not want to do anything. We feel dullness, laziness, lethargy, etc. That is due to the tamoguna. When the mind is having preponderance of rajoguna, then we tend to do activity. However, that activity can be very calm and poised or can become restless. So when it is restless, we call the Patanjali calls the state as kshipta, that means a restless state. That state is actually governed by the rajoguna. There is another state which is vikshipta. Vikshipta is nana kshipta. That means it is breaking, the mind is as it were breaking into many thoughts, and it is extremely restless state. And it has rajoguna as well as sattva guna. That is according to the commentator. Higher states are ekagra and niruddha because they are full of sattva guna. When sattva increases in the mind, then the mind becomes still and calm and pointed. That is the state called ekagra. But the commentator says that this is not also the final state. This is not final because it is unstable. It can break and go back to the states of vikshipta and kshipta. However, a higher state where the sattva is purely existing in its most pristine form, that state is called the niruddha state, and that is a very stable state, and a state which is near to the state of samadhi. So this is again in a nutshell how Patanjali explains the various states of mind and the relation of those states with the gunas and the characteristics of those states. So where is the journey? Where is the journey of the yogin? Here is the journey that through the various states of mind, through the various gunas that are playing on the mind day in and day out, the various states of samadhi are attained. So it is the journey from the ordinary consciousness to the super consciousness. The ordinary consciousness is a state where we are aware of many things. That is the state of the vritti sarupyam. And the final goal is the asampragnata state. That is where all the kleshas are burned and the state of dagda vija happens to the kleshas. And the mind goes from the mudha state to the niruddha state. That is a state where there is preponderance of sattva and the mind is still 1.8 and free from kleshas. So this is the journey that this map tells us, that from the ordinary to the super conscious state, that is the sampragnata, that is the highest form of samadhi, is our journey of a yogi. Now the question here is that our current state is vritti sarupyam, and the final goal is the chittavrittinirodhah, that is the total cessation of all modifications. So whether it is possible or whether it is impossible. So this journey is what we will look at through the eyes of the commentators of Patanjali's yoga aphorisms. So how do we call possibility and impossibility in terms of Patanjali's yoga aphorism? According to Patanjali, possibilities are the practices, the abhyasa. That means the things, the to-dos. We call it the to-do. That means whatever has to be done, he has prescribed as abhyasaha. And if a yogi does the abhyasaha, where does he go? He goes to the goals. That those goals or those intermediate stages before the final stage, that is also mentioned by Patanjali. And what are the impossibilities? According to Patanjali, impossibilities are considered to be the obstacles, yoga vignaha, on the path of sadhana. So he mentions both practices, several practices and several yoga vigna, and how each of those practices can be overcome, can be done to overcome those kind of obstacles. So these two go hand in hand. In Patanjali's yoga aphorism, we will see that he mentions abhyasa and the yoga vigna. Together, they go hand in hand. So as I mentioned that the various practices mentioned by Patanjali are there because there is difference in the capability of sadhakas. That is called the adhikari bhedaha. Due to the capability, difference of capabilities, the various practices are mentioned. And these practices lead the yogi through various intermediate stages to the final stages. And how those intermediate stages are reached, how we will know that intermediate stages have been reached by the results of reaching those states. That is the phalasruti. So Patanjali goes on mentioning the intermediate stages and the result of attaining those stages, that is in terms of the phalasruti. So this is a very, very promising exposition of the journey, that if the yogi goes from the current state, the ordinary conscious state, and does all these practices, these are going to be the results on the way. So here is a map of all the practices, the sadhana, the abhyasa or sadhana. So it mentions various kind of sadhana. For example, viveka darshanaha, then ekatattva abhyasaha, virama pratyaya abhyasaha, etc. These sadhanas lead from the state of vritti sarupyam, that is the ordinary consciousness, to the asampragnata state, that is the super consciousness state. And so during this journey, what happens to the kleshas? They change, they take different form. Currently in the ordinary consciousness state, they are all active, that is called the udara state. And in the super consciousness state, they are completely obliterated, that is called the dagdha bija bhavaha. So this is the journey from the ordinary to the super conscious. And in that journey, what happens to the kleshas? They transform from being active to completely inactive, like a burnt seed. And the state of mind, state of chitta, goes from vritti sarupyam, the ordinary consciousness, to various stages of sampragyata. Under sampragyata, there are many intermediate stages, finally leading to the asampragyata. And the corresponding sadhanas or the practices are mentioned in this snapshot. So on the vertical axis, we have the rise of the consciousness. On the horizontal axis, we have the practices and the possibilities. So having said this, the entire journey of a yogin from the current state is sort of mapped in this diagram. So here the yogin is in the ordinary consciousness state, that is the vritti sarupyam. So whatever thoughts are happening in a very uncontrolled fashion. And so he's totally identified with those vrittis. That is the idea. That is the state of vritti sarupyam. It takes the form of the vrittis. So totally the consciousness is identified with the thoughts. Now from here, after going through abhyasa and vairagya, those two are the primary practices mentioned by Patanjali. By doing that, yogin moves from the ordinary conscious state through various intermediate stages like a staircase. Those are the stages of savitarka, savichara, asmitanugataha, sanandanugataha. These are all various stages of intermediate sampragyata samadhi. And he reaches the state of the sampragyata samadhi, which is also called the pitambara prajna. So this is a very high state where mind is full of sattva and knowledge. So prajna, the prajna is ritambhara in the sense that it is full of the pure knowledge. That is the journey that yogi can undergo from the current state of consciousness. So this is the zone of self-effort. That is, through the various abhyasas, yogi can go from the vritti sarupyam state to the sampragyata or ritambhara state. And the intermediate stages he will pass will be called by various names as mentioned by Patanjali. Now, from here, the final state is a big jump. So if the yogin can practice the virama pratyaya, that means virama means cessation, complete cessation of the modifications. If that abhyasa can be done, then he goes to the final state, which is called the kaivalya padam. Kaivalya, that is the final state. So this is a very arduous journey because this is full of obstacles. Mind can fall, the mind can slip into various kind of states which do not allow to reach this highest state of kaivalya. There is a way, Patanjali mentions, another way, that is the Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana is the worship of God. The idea of God in Patanjali's system is different from other ideas of God or Godhead. However, it is also mentioned as an alternate route. The aphorism says, Ishvara Pranidhanadva. That means that it is also another way to reach to the final state of Kaivalya Padam. But this is easier said than done because there is this is the zone of divine bliss. This is easier said than done because while taking this journey, there can be a distraction to another state which looks like the Kaivalya Pada, that is the Kaivalya Padam Iva. The word that is mentioned is Kaivalya Padam Iva. That is the state of Prakriti Linaha. And a yogin can be trapped in this state while taking the journey to the highest state, that is the Kaivalya Padam. So here is the main obstacle or the main impossibility. So long we are in the zone of self-effort, Patanjali mentions various phalasruti to assure the yogin that these stages can be reached, and while after reaching the state, this is the result of reaching the state. However, when the state of Ritambara Pragya is achieved, from that going to the highest state, that is the Kaivalya Padam, is actually a difficult journey because on the way the yogin can be trapped in the state of Prakriti Lina. So we will understand what is this Prakriti. We will try to understand what is the state. So here is the state of Sampragnata Samadhi or Ritambhara Pragya, which is achieved by the self-effort. And if yogin can practice this very difficult sadhana called the Virama Pratyabhyas, Virama means cessation, completely stilling the mind. If this can be done, then he reaches the state of Asampragyata Samadhi or the Kaivalyapadam or Nirvija Samadhi. But it is actually difficult because by doing that, by refraining from meditating on anything that has qualities, it is very difficult. And as a result, the yogin can be reaching the state of Prakriti Lina, which looks like the state of Kaivalya. So therefore, the word is used is Kaivalya Padamiva. And how it is reached? Instead of taking the practices of Virama Pratyaya, if the yogin does Prakriti Devata Upasana, that means if the meditation is done on the various elements of the nature, the Prakriti, then the state of Kaivalya Padam is not reached, but the state of Prakriti Lina is reached. And this is a state which is not the highest state. Therefore, yogin can come back from that state, can fall from the state back to the state of Ritambhara Pragya. So, what happens in that state? In that state, all samskaras are in the causal state. That is the Prakriti. Prakriti is the causal state. And the kleshas, they do not burn fully. They do not burn fully. That is why it again comes, the state actually is unstable and the yogin falls from that state back to the state of Ritambhara Pragya. So as we have seen before, at the stage of Asampragnata, the kleshas are should be completely burned. That is Dagdavija state. But in this state, the kleshas do not burn. So it is not the final state. And therefore, there is a possibility that the state is gone after some time. So this is the greatest obstacle, or this is the main thing that stands between the yogin and the final state of Kaivalya. It appears just at the time of reaching the final goal. So what happens because of that? Because of that, the yogin does not reach the state of Asampragyata Samadhi, but reaches the sub state, which is the state of Prakriti Lina. And in that state, the kleshas are not gone, but they are in a state of their causal state, that is the state of Prakriti. And how does yogi reach that state? The commentator explains by wrongly meditating on Mahat, Asmita, or Panchatan Matra, reaches that state. That means the fundamental elements, the main elements of Prakriti, if that becomes the object of meditation of the yogin, then the state of Prakriti Lina is reached instead of the state of Asampragyata Samadhi. So this is called the Prakriti Devadopasana. That means the meditation on the different elements of Prakriti. So there is a illustration in the Vayu Purana about how the yogin goes to what are the different paths to reach the Prakriti Lina state. So, for example, if the object of meditation becomes the indriyas, that means the senses, then the yogin state stays there for a very short time. That is, according to the Vayu Purana, only 10 manvantara. Whereas if he meditates on more fine elements like the 5 main elements, the I principle, that is the Asmita, the intellect, or the unmanifest, then the duration of staying in the Prakriti Lina state actually increases. So more subtle is the object of meditation, longer is the duration of stay in the Prakriti Lina state. So this says that due to a wrong type of meditation and meditating on fine elements of the nature, taking that to be the the goal, the yogin actually stays in that state for a longer period of time before returning to the state of Vyuthana, that is the state where all the samskaras again become active. So this is the information we gather from the Vayu Purana. So therefore, what has to be done if this kind of state is achieved, which is not the final state? Definitely the answer is the yogin has to try to destroy the fine samskaras. But is it possible? In the Tattva Vaisharadi, the commentator mentions that this is not possible. This is beyond self-effort. So immediately we become anxious. The yogin becomes worried that if this state is not transcended through self-effort, then what is the fate of the yogin? So here Patanjali comes with the solution. Patanjali says that the divine grace is a way to eliminate all fine samskaras. And here the commentators give very detailed explanation of how that divine grace can alleviate all the fine samskaras and help the yogi go from the Prakriti-lina state to the final state, that is the Kaivalya. So here Vyasa explains that pranidhan, that is a form of devotion. It is a bhakti vishesha, special kind of devotion. What happens in that kind of devotion? That if the yogi practices this pranidhana, then with a longing heart, then the Ishvara, the idea of Ishvara in Patanjali system is a bit different. Then there is a overflowing compassion of the Ishvara, who is a Purusha Vishesha, who is free from all kleshas and samskaras. And due to that overflowing compassion, the Purusha Vishesha destroys all the fine samskaras in the chitta of the yogin, and the yogin attains the final samadhi, the highest samadhi. And this is said to be the quickest way, asannatamaha samadhi labha bhavati. So this is a very, very important information we gather from the commentators, and this is really promising information because the state of Prakriti Lina is so subtle that it is difficult to obliterate the fine samskaras in their subtle form, and it is said to be beyond self-effort. So therefore, the invocation of divine grace is very important at that time. And Patanjali explains that this Ishvara Pranidhana has the power to obliterate those fine samskaras and allow the yogi to attain the samadhi in the quickest way. That is asannatama samadhi labha bhavati. That is a very promising statement given in the commentary. We also find similar idea in the Smriti and Shrutis. So for example, Kathopanishad says that Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo na medhaya na bahuna shrutena yamaiva vrinute tena labhya tasya atma vivrinute dhanaswam. That means this important statement, yamaiva vrinute tena labhya, this self cannot be known by any other thing. It can be known through the self alone that the aspirant prays to. So as if the Supreme Being actually bestows the ability to know the Supreme Being himself. That is the way the seeker can know the Supreme Being, only if the self reveals its true nature. So here also we get a similar idea that the power of the Supreme Being bestowing that grace through which that final step, which cannot be done by self-effort, is actually becomes possible. Again, we also find evidence from the Smritis. The Srimad Bhagavad Gita says that the darkness is dispelled by me out of compassion, and this is not possible by the sadhaka himself, but only by the grace of the Lord, that anukampa, the grace. Out of that compassion, these yogi can get to that final state. So we come back to our fundamental question: is it possible? That impossibility which looms large at the final stage is gone by the divine grace. And in this context, we may recall Sri Ramakrishna saying, "Kolite Naradiya Bhakti." That means in this age, the devotion, the path of devotion is the only way. So therefore, if we resort to the bhakti yoga or the path of devotion, that will be helpful also, as it is helpful for the yogin who is struggling to cross the prakriti lila state. So answer to our question, which is which was raised in the beginning, is it impossible? Is it possible? It looks like the analysis, the detailed analysis of the commentators say that at the final stage where yogin cannot put self-effort to obliterate all the fine samskaras, the role of divine grace is actually most important. And the Ishvara, out of our overflowing love and compassion, helps the yogin to overcome that state and go to the final state, and which is also a path shown by Sri Ramakrishna. So therefore, our as aspirants, as students of yoga, we also need to practice this devotion along with all other practices mentioned in the Patanjali system of yoga. So here are some references through which we have drawn this presentation, and thank you.